This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John DeRoe.
Right to Life Radio, we've had some big explosive news in the pro-life world, particularly coming out of President Trump and what this could mean for the future of the pro-life movement as we head into election 2024. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council here with us. Good to see you, Mr. Jonathan.
Happy to be here. Thank you, sir.
All right. So let's head into this. So the pro-life world has been having a lot of, it's a great Italian word for this, agita. A lot of consternation. A lot of agita over President Trump and his position on abortion, with good reason. President Trump had been very critical of Governor DeSantis and the state of Florida for passing a heartbeat ban on abortion. This is banning abortion after the 6-week point of pregnancy, which is when fetal heartbeat can be detected. President Trump was saying that it was kind of cruel and it didn't have enough exceptions, and he was reading like chapter and verse out of kind of the liberal playbook for attacking this bill. And the timing couldn't have been worse. It was right before the state of Ohio was having a statewide referendum on their own heartbeat law, which went down in flames, which was really distressing. Ohio's Issue 1, which enshrined legal abortion into the state constitution of the state of Ohio. It was a disaster. Basically, Ohio putting Roe v. Wade, more or less, into its state's constitution. It was a disaster. So there were a lot of people heading into this election who were like, well, what's Trump's position on abortion? What is it now in this post-Roe world? If Trump is going to knock state governments, pro-life state governments, from passing aggressive, good pro-life laws, then is he even really pro-life? Like, this is the whole point of overturning Roe v. Wade, was to allow states to do this, to allow states to pass laws that limit abortion.
Right.
That's what Roe v. Wade and its successor case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, always limited and prohibited. So basically, President Trump there's a lot of reporting, and this reporting is being confirmed. I'm seeing stories about it on the ABC News and the New York Times. New York Times was the first to report this story, that Trump is sort of privately embracing this idea for him to back a nationwide 16-week limit on abortion. Now, Jonathan, I want to hear how you react to this news. Mm-hmm. I reacted to this fairly positively. I actually kind of think this is progress. I want to get, and I feel like it's coloring my interpretation of Trump's attacks on Florida for their heartbeat bill. I'm not saying this is good, but I suspected at the time, and I suspect now, that Trump was really only criticizing Florida because he was running against Ron DeSantis. And basically, I think if Ron DeSantis had said that, the sky is blue, Trump would have come out and said, fake news, phony Ron DeSantis, disloyal Ron DeSantis, says the sky is blue. It's not, it's green.
Right.
Believe me, many people are telling me, many very smart
people.
The best people are telling me the sky is green. I think this is progress. Other people in the pro-life world don't think so. What does Jonathan Keller think?
Well, John, I think you have to look at this from at least two different angles.
All right.
Angle number one.
With my head like this?
Yes.
And then with my head like this?
That's right.
Okay.
So some of our friends at Students for Life of America, which is, generally speaking, great organization.
And when we say friends, we do mean like
legitimate
friends, not like when we say our friends at Planned Parenthood, where we're saying that a little more ironically. No, genuinely good people at Students for Life.
Yeah, like you and I, John, have both spoken for Students for Life groups multiple times. Yeah. Our good friend Bernadette Tacey
We love Bernadette.
She's the
bomb.
Used to run the Students for Life group here at Fresno State. And
shout out to Noelle and Addison.
Oh, yeah.
The current leadership at Fresno State students, and all the bro-lifers.
The bro-lifers.
all the guys in Fresno State Students for Life. We like Students for Life.
Yes.
But they were upset by this position, by this reported position that Trump is privately running with.
Right. Back on Wednesday, the 21st, they said in an email that I received from Kristen Hawkins, their marketing department, she said, "Hey, did you see what Trump said?" And it was not just to me, I should clarify. This is a broad email.
She was not personally emailing John.
But she is complaining and saying, "Oh, come on, this is not going far enough." And it's interesting, John, whenever you see national pro-life groups, and standard IRS disclaimer for everybody, our organizations are 501c3s. We don't endorse or oppose candidates.
Yeah.
But I'll just say, objectively, it's interesting to see how some national pro-life groups try to thread this needle with President Trump. Where on the one hand, they're like, well, most of our supporters are probably really big Trump fans. And on the other hand, they're like, yeah, but there's some stuff that he says that is a little frustrating with how he says it.
There you can see and you see it the most in emails that they send to their donors.
Yes.
Which Jonathan, working in pro-life organizations as Jonathan and I do, I think we're signed up for every pro-life nonprofit donor email list known to mankind between the two of us. So you can see this tension, like President Trump criticizes Ron DeSantis for signing the heartbeat bill. How do these pro-life organizations respond to it?
Well,
like they
can't. We want to defend Ron DeSantis. If it was anybody other than Trump attacking Ron DeSantis, we would come out and say,
completely blasted anyone other than Trump who said that. But they realize so many of their donors support President Trump that they kind of are. How do I finagle this?
So this is how Students for Life tease this off in their email. They say, after having the most pro-life presidency ever, Donald Trump now seems to need a refresher on human biology. According to the New York Times, and this is hilarious, by the way, I love this line. According to the New York Times, parentheses, which means it could or could not be true, on parentheses.
There you go. Just got to take that shot at the New York Times.
Ship him in the side.
Good for them.
President Donald Trump has said that he, quote, likes the idea of a 16-week national abortion ban with 3 exceptions in cases of rape or incest or to save the life of the mother, unquote. And then in their words, back to Students for Life, not great. Now, here's why they say this. They say, here's what President Trump got correct, in all bold. The need for national action on abortion.
Yes, agreed. Completely agree with that.
Next line, bold. Here's what he got wrong. Setting a limit at all caps, 16 weeks, which would allow more than 94% of abortions to continue.
Yes.
So look, I agree.
16 weeks is not enough.
Yes, I agree.
Anything other than from the moment of conception
it's not enough.
Obviously.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So here's the thing where it's the tension.
Yeah.
I agree with Students for Life on what they are saying here, philosophically, biologically. In fact, I think as we
ethically, everything.
As we're hopefully going to get to in a later story in the show, there's our tease. There are some places around the country, like Alabama Supreme Court, that are actually saying
IVF, that IVF babies have a right to life. And yes.
That even before 6 weeks, which is the current, heartbeat laws, basically, they're saying that from maybe 8 days, babies have a right to life.
Yeah.
So I agree philosophically with Students for Life, and I agree with the Alabama Supreme Court on how they said things.
Yeah.
But this is the second angle.
This is the but.
The thing is, what President Trump is saying, you have to look at it in the current post-Roe context under the Dobbs v. Jackson regime, the new Supreme Court decision. Of course, you have to look at it in that regard.
Yeah.
But you also have to look at it not just in this microcosm of the last, 20 months, basically, that abortion has been vulnerable to regulation because of Dobbs.
Right.
You have to look at it in the context. We just celebrated, John, a couple weeks ago, 51 weeks since Roe v. Wade.
51 years.
I'm sorry, yes, 51 years.
And we didn't celebrate. We
noted. We commemorated. Marked.
It's been 51 years since Roe v. Wade came down from the Supreme Court.
Right. We marked that grim anniversary of 51 years ago.
Yeah.
And if we just zoom out beyond the 2 years since Dobbs, 51 years... This is the, other than Dobbs, this is the most pro-life piece of federal regulation that has ever been proposed.
Yeah. Or proposed with any shot of actually being able to be enacted.
There were efforts back in the 1970s and early 80s of, maybe we can get a constitutional right to life, a constitutional amendment that's going to abolish abortion federally, nationwide constitutionally.
Which never got off the ground.
No. So basically for 40 years, there has always been this effort of how can we chip away bit by bit by bit at the Supreme Court? How can we pass little pieces of legislation? And John, the most pro-life piece of federal legislation that has passed and been upheld by the Supreme Court. I mean, you could argue, I guess, maybe that the Hyde Amendment is, but that's kind of a backdoor. It's not a real true regulation on abortion per se. It's on funding. The most pro-life thing that you could say has passed was the partial birth abortion ban.
Yeah, which basically stopped no abortions, but the debate over that
Was
and
powerful.
the passage of that was powerful, and
It was.
and also correlated to a pretty significant drop in abortion rates nationwide.
So it makes me wonder.
And a big shift in American public perception and public opinion on abortion too, in a positive direction.
And it makes me wonder, John, what's going to happen if this piece of legislation even had a hearing? How much would it begin to change the conversation?
If you could have a hearing, if you had a hearing on it and you could tell people, this is what a child at 16 weeks is, this is what a second trimester abortion is. Because that's what we're talking about is it, more or less, a few weeks beyond, I guess, 13 weeks kind of end of first trimester, 13 weeks and change. This is what a second trimester abortion entails. A second trimester abortion entails the following. Mm-hmm. And the second trimester, a second trimester abortion is an incredibly violent procedure. There's no other way to describe it other than very violent and horrible. Mm-hmm. If you have hearings in Congress where you're saying this is what we are banning,
and you were entering into the congressional record photos and video of second trimester abortions.
I mean, that could have a massive impact on the culture. So, all right. So now when we return, I want to give myself a full long segment for this part of the show. I'll give my view and why I think actually this move by President Trump is urgently needed. It's not all that we want, but it's an important thing. It's showing that there's some Republicans out there who are going to have some amount of spine on this on the national level. We'll get to that next. This is Right to Life Radio, production of Right to Life of Central California. Next, here on Power Talk. Back with Right to Life Radio. Reports from the New York Times are indicating that President Trump is supportive of a nationwide ban on abortion after the 16-week point in pregnancy. Some pro-lifers are ticked at this. Jonathan and I think, are a little less ticked, and let's get to explaining why. All right, so let's understand the context. Is 16 weeks too late? Of course it's too late. Anything after 0 weeks is too late for a nationwide abortion ban. But let's again remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to pass a bill in Congress that would apply to the whole country.
Including
California.
Oh, yeah.
Including
Illinois,
California. All these
Oregon,
states that have legalized,
basically,
that have decriminalized, rather, more or less decriminalized neglecting a baby after the baby is born if the baby has survived an abortion. To alter every single state's practice when it comes to abortion. This is a wildly positive thing. And I think it shows that where the tensions are in the Republican Party and how Trump can resolve some of those core tensions in a really positive way. So let me explain this. Now, by the way, before some of you may say, Girardi, you're just a Trump shill, or Jonathan Keller, you're a shill for Donald Trump. I can assure you that Jonathan and I are not shills for Donald Trump. Okay. Right to Life of Central California doesn't endorse or oppose anyone for public office. I am giving you my 501c3 compliant analysis right here. If you want some non-501c3 compliant thoughts on this topic, you can listen to Right to Life Radio. Excuse me, no.
The John Girardi Show.
You can listen to the John Girardi Show Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. And if you listen to that, you can also hear that I am not a Donald Trump shill. Yeah. I like to think I call balls and strikes when it comes to Donald Trump. If he does something I like, I fully acknowledge it. If he does something I dislike, I think I fully acknowledge it. And we, I think, have been very consistent on this show, calling balls and strikes. When President Trump does something really good, we give him credit for it.
Right.
When President Trump doesn't do something great, like keeping Anthony Fauci in his job and keeping Francis Collins in his job, and both of them working to promote fetal tissue research, embryo destructive stem cell research, we're going to say that was really stupid by President Trump to keep them in their jobs. We were criticizing Trump for keeping Francis Collins in his job way before COVID was ever a thing.
That's right.
Jonathan and I were ranting and raving about that in 2017. So don't come crying to us if Francis Collins was doing stuff you don't like about COVID. Jonathan and I wanted to get rid of him for abortion-related reasons. Anyway, So I think we have a pretty consistent track record. The biggest thing that has been giving me agita. The show is all about agita.
It's not gabagool.
It's not gabagool. It's agita. I can hear Colton like, all right, this is going to be the title for the podcast. The thing that has really concerned pro-lifers, I think, looking at politicians, looking at Republican politicians in Congress, is I think Republican politicians want to run as far away from the issue of abortion as humanly possible. Since the Dobbs decision came down in June of 2022, every statewide referendum on abortion, pro-lifers have lost. Every single state, doesn't matter. Kentucky, they lost. Ohio, they lost. Red state, blue state. It's been terrible. Kansas. Mm-hmm. And a bunch of Republican electeds have basically said, well, when presented with the idea, should we regulate abortion at the national level? Because Democrats sure as heck want to. Democrats are all in. The only thing Joe Biden's running on is, quote, restore Roe. And we talked last week about how like pro-abortion activists are like, we don't love that language. Like Roe v. Wade wasn't as good as what we want. That's all Biden is running on. At this point, he can't really run on the economy. He can't run on foreign policy. He can't run on immigration. All he has to run on is that he realizes more Americans agree with him than with Donald Trump on abortion. And as a result, a bunch of elected Republicans like Mitch McConnell, when they are asked about should we pass nationwide legislation to restrict abortion now that Roe is off the books, now that we can do that, what does McConnell say?
I think abortion.
Gotta gargle with pebbles first.
I think abortion is best left for the states. I think it's an issue for the states to decide. It's an issue for the states to decide.
He is running away from the issue and saying it's just something the states should just decide it. McConnell doesn't want to deal with it. Elected Republicans in Congress, many of them don't want to deal with it. Tom McClintock, who voted, represents a portion of Fresno County. So here I am. I'm going to criticize him. Tom McClintock, who has voted time and time and time and time again, back when Roe was on the books, when Planned Parenthood versus Casey was on the books, and these votes didn't matter, these laws were never going to come into effect. As a member of the House, Tom McClintock has voted a gazillion times for nationwide laws to restrict abortion that he knew could never come into effect because Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey were on the books. Now that they're off the books, when Trevor Carey and I interviewed him here on Power Talk to ask him, hey, do you support nationwide restrictions on abortion? He couldn't have been more of a kind of answer like, I need to see if that's something that Congress can regulate given its role within our constitutional order. He voted for it 1 billion times.
Yes.
So Republican electeds are terrified of voting for nationwide abortion legislation. But that's what they need to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the way we shift. It's the way you shift public opinion on this. Winning elections, winning votes, passing laws. Nobody liked Obamacare. Nobody liked Obamacare when it was introduced. Nobody liked Obamacare when it got passed. Democrats lost a bunch of elections. And guess what? Obamacare is here to stay.
Yep.
They changed public perception of it over time. People got used to it over time. They turned that ratchet, and guess what? That ratchet goes one way, and it's never going back. The odds of repealing Obamacare at this point are slim to none.
Right.
Even if Trump gets elected, even if Republicans win majorities in the House and the Senate, I don't see any way, shape, or form that Obamacare is going to get repealed. And I think Republicans have to take the approach of, yes, passing a nationwide abortion restriction, it might result in some short-term losses, but dadgummit, it moves the conversation. It moves public opinion. And to at least ban on a nationwide level 6% of all abortions in one fell swoop, yes, please. Sign me up.
Yep.
I'll do that in a heartbeat.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Now, do I think we could ban abortion earlier? Maybe. I think realistically, though, there's no way we could pass a nationwide heartbeat bill.
Right.
I don't know that that's possible. So what I would say is, within the realm of what is politically possible, this is about the best that you can endorse at the nationwide level. And here's part of my hope with all of this. 2 names have been floated as possible vice presidential choices for Mr. Trump. Those 2 names are Tim Scott and J.D. Vance.
Yep.
Tim Scott, U.S. Senator representing South Carolina. J.D. Vance, U.S. Senator representing Ohio. Both of them are phenomenal on the question of abortion.
Yes.
At the very least. Both of them are phenomenal on the question of abortion. Vance is clearly very tight with Obama, with Trump. Excuse me, not tight with Obama. Vance is clearly very tight with Trump.
Right.
And I am guessing maybe this conversation that's happening internally with Trump, it may be the result of good, reasonable voices in Trump's ear, like Senator Scott, like Senator Vance. I am hoping that this is leading us to an eventual Trump announcement of someone like that. Trump's pick for vice president is going to be one of the more critical vice presidential selections in American history because he's definitionally going to be limited to only one term.
Right.
So I wonder if this is related to that. Again, I don't disagree with Students for Life of America. Yeah, we should be trying to ban abortion
At all stages.
at all stages.
Sure.
All throughout.
And John,
we'll
with
talk
that,
about that next.
Both of our congressional campaigns here in California are now over based on our extreme position we both just staked out.
So now we're never going to get elected to Congress here in California. I don't know. Unless Vince Fong drops out and Mike Boudreau falls. Yeah, anyway, that race, maybe one of us could win someday. Anyway, nonetheless, I think that this is a very positive development. President Trump wanting to endorse some kind of nationwide restriction on abortion is a positive thing, and I really hope he can pursue this. I hope there's enough pro-life votes in Congress to pursue this at some point down the road. I hope this is something that can be pursued. All right. When we return, we are going to discuss the Alabama Supreme Court with an interesting decision about IVF. Jonathan and I are all over the story of IVF. That is next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, President Trump is apparently, according to the New York Times, endorsing a 16-week nationwide restriction on abortion. Some pro-lifers are criticizing this, saying it doesn't go far enough. I understand that, but on the whole, I think this is a really positive development. However, relating to these stories of should we be protecting people earlier than 16 weeks, I absolutely think we should. This leads me to a really interesting story about IVF. Now, Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
You and I, we've been covering IVF pretty extensively on this show for the last couple months.
Yeah, because there's lots of stories. There's lots of...
Yeah, well, and I think the thing that blew my mind was reading this piece from the National Catholic Register where they were trying to assess how many... So for those who don't know, IVF, in vitro fertilization, this is the process whereby new embryos, human embryos, can be created in a petri dish, in glass, literally. That's what in vitro means. By sort of manually putting egg cell and sperm cells together. And this is done to basically a lot of people who are struggling with infertility will go to an IVF clinic to get fertilized embryos to implant in themselves so that they can have a baby. The thing that rocked my world, the problem with the whole process, though, is wastage. Wastage of what is human embryos, human lives. And the stat that just absolutely bowled me over is that pretty much every year in America, approximately 2 million embryos are either frozen, so just kept in permanent stasis in a freezer somewhere, like no prospect of if this living human organism is actually going to be able to be born, are either frozen or destroyed.
Right.
So basically, the IVF process creates more embryos than can ever possibly be implanted and grow and be born. And so you have to figure out, well, what the heck are we doing with all these embryos? Now, Alabama's state Supreme Court had a court case where they were looking at embryos created through IVF and whether they could be rightful subjects of a wrongful death lawsuit. If IVF created embryos are destroyed, are they living human persons covered under Alabama's wrongful death civil statute? Okay, so wrongful death is a cause of action, a reason for suing somebody. Okay, so Jonathan, maybe let's not have Jonathan be the result of killing somebody. Sure. Let's say a construction company has, I don't know, the wrecking ball that they use fell off the chain from the crane and landed and squashed somebody walking by on the street. Okay, the family of the squashed man, the family of the squashed, could sue the construction company for wrongful death. And
the squashhead could sue the squasher.
The squashie can sue the squasher. Okay, so wrongful death is a cause of action. It's on top of the negligence claim, whatever. There's a wrongful death claim that can be made. Okay, so here's the story, written by Adria Walker from what is the outlet? From The Guardian, UK Guardian. In a first-of-its-kind decision, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled Friday that frozen embryos are children, allowing 2 wrongful death lawsuits against a Mobile, Alabama fertility clinic to proceed. The decision could have sweeping implications for people seeking in vitro fertilization or other assisted reproductive technology treatments. Well, it's not really a treatment. Nothing about your fertility is being treated or fixed in IVF. Is it actually healthcare? We'll talk about that later. And could increase criminalization. Oh, I love the language they use here. Could increase criminalization of expectant people. What is it?
I missed that part
are we
of it.
Are we trying to say parents or IVF? But whatever. In 2021, a patient at Mobile's Center for Reproductive Medicine wandered into the clinic's cryogenic nursery and removed several embryos. According to the lawsuit, the sub-zero temperatures at which the embryos had been stored freeze-burned the patient's hand, causing the patient to drop the embryos on the floor, killing them. This is terrible.
Yeah.
This is sci-fi dystopian future insanity. Anyway.
And just to clarify, John, because it sounds like, whoops, I dropped a vial of blood.
Yeah.
I was coming in to do some blood work for you, and oops, I dropped the blood on the ground.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr.
Good.
Smith. We gotta have. I know you live
Need
an
another
hour
blood
away.
sample. Yeah.
I know that it's a big hassle. You got a couple kids. But I need you to come back to the clinic. We need to draw another 2 pints of blood.
Right.
I know it's a pain. But in that situation, could he sue them maybe for, I don't know, infliction of emotional distress? Maybe, sure. If it was,
That's probably a reach.
maybe for
I'm really attached to my blood. I mean, maybe he could demand his money back for wasting his time. I don't know.
But in that situation, you could be like, man, that is a great inconvenience and it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
But in this case, it literally
This is
is
a dead human.
Oh, sorry. We know that you and your wife were really hoping to have children.
Implant this IVF baby.
Child. Yeah. And you were planning, you had the money saved up, you were ready to go, and you were looking forward to in 9 to 12 months having a little baby. But
Oops.
sorry. Yeah. Oops, your child is dead.
Yeah. Which that's the unfortunate thing is that this stuff like this happens in IVF clinics all the time with babies that aren't wanted. Now,
Right.
it seems like this baby might have been actually wanted. So, all right. So the 3 couples who lost their frozen embryos sued for wrongful death, but the clinic claimed that Alabama's wrongful death of a minor act did not apply to embryos outside of the womb. Mobile County Circuit Court Judge Jill Parrish Phillips agreed with that argument and ruled to dismiss the case, but the state Supreme Court threw it out last week. Alabama Supreme Court Justice Jay Mitchell wrote that embryos are indeed protected under the state's existing law. Quote, the central question presented in these consolidated appeals, which involve the death of embryos kept in a cryogenic nursery, is whether the act contains an unwritten exception to that rule for extrauterine children, that is, unborn children who are located outside of a biological uterus at the time they are killed, he wrote. Under existing black letter law, the answer to that question is no. The wrongful death of a minor act applies to all unborn children, regardless of their location. I mean, it seems like what he's doing is just saying, hey, the statute says what it says. Like there's
Yes.
if there's not a explicit written exception for IVF babies, then there ain't no exception. And it appears that the statute doesn't have an exception.
Well, and the hilarious thing to me, John, I did a sample headline that I would like to see. It was court follows the science, liberals big mad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Literally, the court is just being like, well,
These are children.
Yes, this says that if a child is killed, they're subject to, people are subject to these penalties, and
This is a
children were
child.
killed, ergo.
Yeah. The story continues. Since Roe v. Wade made abortion legal in all 50 states in 1973, many anti-abortion advocates have pushed for the introduction of personhood amendments, or amendments that would grant fetuses and embryos the same rights as living, breathing children. I mean, embryos are living. Like, I'm not sure what the article is saying here. Like they're not inanimate, or they're not inanimate like clumps of tissue. Like they're living organisms.
Right.
Also, I mean, maybe they're not breathing in the fashion of respiring, but yes, they are respiring because they have oxygen flowing through their bodies.
Let me tell you, John, I had a friend who was doing an interview yesterday, and she said, hey, I need a quote for how to talk about this issue. What should I say? And I said, well, this is how if you have a one-liner, this is what I would say. Basic biology tells us from the moment of fertilization, each and every human being is a genetically unique and distinct individual. The court simply followed the science and ruled accordingly.
Yeah, and that's what's happening. And I really do think now, I really do think that IVF needs to be the next frontier for the pro-life movement. I think that a lot of pro-lifers are too timid to talk about it because I think there is less support for limiting IVF than there is even for limiting abortion.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Which is crazy, but I do think that's true. So anyway, we're going to dig more into this after the break. I mean, again, this stuff is just this very dystopian stuff. The idea that someone's just going into a clinic and breaking vials and destroying human organisms that way. We'll talk about it next. This is Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life Central California, rtlcc.org. Back with Right to Life Radio, we're talking about the Alabama Supreme Court saying that children conceived through IVF are indeed children for the purposes of Alabama state law. And
Shocker.
for the purposes of, this was a case where someone broke into the back of an IVF clinic and destroyed a couple of embryos in glass, and the parents of those embryos sued that person for wrongful death. And the Alabama Supreme Court ruled, yep, those are human beings that you can sue for their wrongful death. And now this is putting a bunch of liberals in not just liberals, unfortunately, probably some conservatives who are okay with IVF, into a tizzy, saying, oh my gosh, is this going to lead to attacks on IVF? As if we didn't mean what we said.
Yes.
And even the news story, this was from the UK Guardian, talking about how the state Supreme Court thinks that their wrongful death statute applies to both fetuses and both embryos in vitro, as well as, quote, living, breathing children. It's
Yes.
like, well, the embryos are also living. They are also breathing.
Okay, John.
Like, yeah.
So I have to say on this, the fact that I had friends in my occasionally discussed liberal chat group that I'm friends with.
Yes.
That I bring up.
I've always heard of this from afar, and I'm still fascinated how you're still in it. But anyway, continue.
Well, so the hilarious thing to me was today, one of them shared
I'm
this.
really more fascinated why they let you in. Like, do these guys not understand?
I'm such a lovable, huggable guy.
Such a lovable, huggable theocrat. Anyway.
That's right. well, this is the hilarious thing to me. Like, and I like these people. I have met several of them in person. Most of them I've met in person.
Okay.
One of them posted this story from NBC News. Nikki Haley sides with Alabama Supreme Court on IVF ruling. And then the quote is, "Embryos to me are babies." That's the quote. And then he replied and said, #moderate. Like he's mocking her like, oh, look at the moderate.
That Nikki Haley is moderate.
And I replied and just said, I mean, she's right. But
I'm just amazed they don't kick you out.
Well, here's the best part. I kind of teased a little bit. I'm cautious. I don't push myself too hard.
Clearly, yes.
But one of them said, this is John, like you said, this is the level of dialogue on this, or the level of thinking. And I say, with respect to my friends, this is all anonymous, but quote, "I don't think it's a winning issue to have my friends get to be priced out of having kids. IVF is already pricey as is." And I'm like, okay, well, that ignores the moral and ethical component entirely. You're just talking about it financially.
Or it does touch on one of the key moral and ethical components of it, but they're not realizing that this is the problem with IVF is that you are commodifying children.
Yes.
That you are buying children. Like
Yes.
that you're instrumentalizing other human beings for the sake of your own fulfillment, as opposed to treating them as proper subjects, as proper individual entities deserving of love and care and responsibility.
And I don't know if that's what this individual was saying, but
I'm reading probably more into it than he means, but I think that is a real problem with if your perspective is this is going to make it way too expensive to create a child in a glass tube. Like, it should be.
If Haley's
it should
point
be more expensive than anyone could afford.
If Haley's point is that these people are inferring is that, like she said, well, we need to be very, very careful with this. If her point is, you know what, maybe you shouldn't be creating 15 to 25 embryos at a time and then implanting 5 to 10 of them at a time. Yeah. And then just, we'll do selective reduction. We'll just
if we wind up with triplets,
embryo
we'll
roulette, no big deal.
Yeah.
If the idea is, no, we're going to fertilize one and then we're going to implant one, maybe it would make it more expensive, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem with this is the problem with IVF. We are creating millions more human beings than can ever possibly be born. And it's something on the level of 2 million. This is the stat that bowled me over, folks. IVF clinics create almost every year, according to some estimates, 2 million children, 2 million embryos who are either put in stasis in a freezer or destroyed. Because it's just wastage. It's just wastage in the process. And I really think that the pro-life movement needs to start grappling with this a little bit more and to not
on the sheer numbers alone.
And because that's more than the number of abortions that happen in America. So at any rate, I'm kudos to the Alabama Supreme Court for doing the right thing. Kudos to Nikki Haley even for saying something positive and not taking the moderate road for once.
That's right.
That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you guys next time on Power Talk.